Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Luis, and this time we are actually not doing an anime video. This is the first time I'm talking about a live-action Western series. Today we are going to be talking about HBO's Euphoria. I wanted to make this video because I just find this show so incredibly interesting and well done in the things it does do well. There are also many controversies surrounding the show. We love a problematic fave on this channel. This will be an analysis of the whole first season, but I won't get into spoilers just yet. That will come up later, so if you still not watched season 1 and would like to, you don't have to leave just yet. Euphoria is a series on HBO that premiered in 2019. It is loosely based on an Israeli miniseries of the same name. The series mainly follows 6 teenagers who go to the fictional East Highland High School. There's our protagonist, Rue Bennett, who is struggling with addiction, Jules Vaughn, the new girl in town who bonds with Rue extremely quickly, Kat Hernandez, who struggles with her body image and self-esteem, Cassie Howard, who has to navigate her high school years while being incredibly sexualized by the men and boys around her, Nate Jacobs, and all the shit he does, and Maddie Perez, his on and off girlfriend. The show was created, written, and directed by Sam Levinson. Zendaya, who plays Rue, was also a producer on the series. Euphoria is known for its heavy topics, drug use, visually stimulating cinematography, fashion, and sex scenes. Euphoria has become one of the most popular shows on television today. The reason why is said to be how so many Gen Zs relate to the characters, along with its very intense storylines, raw and honest depictions of the complexities of sex, addiction, and mental illness. In its wide popularity, this series has not existed without its own controversies. I'm sure you've seen the TikToks and the Twitter posts about how the teenagers in Euphoria dress.
And why aren't you in uniform?
There are also tons of people expressing their discomfort around the nudity of teenage characters. The world of Euphoria feels like it's a depiction of what older adults think kids these days must be doing. The drugs, the sex, the sending of nudes, etc., etc. However, this show seems to be very popular with teens, and many of them denounce some of these controversies and exclaim how this show reigns true for them. I mean, I graduated from high school about 7 years ago at this point, and my high school experience was nothing like this. Granted, I was a shut-in with friends who didn't do anything close to this, but Euphoria depicts all of these shocking things as if they were the norm. I'm not trying to say that these things never happen. I'm sure there are teenagers that go to local fairs and do Molly, have house parties, and have sex. However, studies have shown that in our current generation of teens, only the minority are doing these things. The thing that I would argue about all of this is, who wants to see a whole series about kids who study as they're supposed to, are involved in school clubs, and regularly volunteer? No one. That sounds like a terrible show. If the series is a drama, then give us the drama. All of these things that Euphoria depicts are pretty bad, and it's the bad things that lead to the most conflict, and the conflict, well, that's just good TV, baby. Also, just to preface this video, just because I'm explaining how the artistic significance of these controversial topics plays a role in the story does not mean I am outright condoning or excusing them. Explanations are not excuses. There's also the pretty mainstream concern that this show romanticizes drug use. At face value, I can understand that. The gorgeous visuals accompanied by Rue explaining that she does drugs to find the peace she has been looking for all her life does look pretty bad. I think it's time for me to air out this specific bias I have when it comes to forms of media. I am a very visual person. I am an absolute whore for colorful, thought-provoking, and just downright pretty visuals. In this day and age, give me a reason to look away from my phone. I know that's very Gen Z of me to say, but it's the truth. My monkey brain likes pretty things. I am as God made me. Leave me alone. I would argue this hyper-stylized aesthetic doesn't sensationalize drugs. The colorful and outright trippy way they make these teenagers look as they're on substances is merely a byproduct of the overall cinematographic decisions that Sam Levinson made. He said he wanted Euphoria's visuals to achieve an emotional realism. While those two words sound like they're at odds, Euphoria's cinematography is not rooted in realism. Some would argue quite the opposite. But the other word, emotional, would be the thing that really forms the style of cinematography. Levinson has said that he wants Euphoria to make the internal external. He wanted to display the emotions we feel in adolescence, how everything is amplified, blown out of proportion, so important, and feels like it's going to last forever. Euphoria's cinematographer Marcel Rev said that Levinson had this vision of making the show that looks like how teenagers imagine themselves. One example, Euphoria's instantly recognizable lighting. They mostly use a blue-orange contrast. This is a very basic type of lighting contrast used in many cinematic works, but in Euphoria, it's cranked up high enough to the point where the settings become otherworldly. In the show's plentiful party scenes, they often use blues and purples to make the scenes almost dreamlike, either in combination or one specific color in mind. The camera movement is also extremely particular. The camera was intended to have this energy that ties the different storylines together. The camera is almost always on a track or dolly. The sets are built from scratch with specific camera maneuvering in mind. Like this scene in the pilot with Rue and Jules in bed together, this shot was achieved by having the ceiling on hinges, hanging by ropes, and the ceiling detaches from the walls. In the carnival episode, they built the entire carnival around their equipment, and the filming took 6 days, which almost never happens in television production. In this video, I'm going to take a different approach to how I format my analysis. I'm going to be talking about the pilot first, and then going into the storyline of the individual characters. I think the best way to do it, since this is a much larger plot-relevant cast compared to my last analysis video, and the main cast of this series is tightly related to one another, so I can't introduce one character without leaving another out. With that said, from this point on, we are going to dive into Season 1 and its plot extensively, so if you do not want any spoilers, you can kindly click off the video now. The series opens with Rue's backstory. This is going to happen for other characters up until the finale. We learn that Rue was born X amount of days after 9/11. Rue is very clear about how inconvenienced and vindictive she is that she was born. She struggles with severe OCD, anxiety, and potential cocktail of other mental health conditions. There's this little sequence of Rue's mother, Leslie, telling her about famous artists in history that have dealt with similar conditions. She means this to be inspiring and motivating, but this is juxtaposed with these historical figures offing themselves, which is bleak, but I'll admit, pretty funny. If this wasn't enough, Rue's father gets cancer, he's bedridden, and her mother has to get a second job to support the family and pay the medical bills. Rue's father later dies, which most likely leads Rue to really start using substances. Then we come to the summer before Season 1 takes place. Rue overdoses and she is found by her younger sister Gia, who calls an ambulance that takes her to the hospital. She is later admitted to rehab, and that's where she spends her summer. Now we are done with the flashback, and it is the weekend before the school year starts. Straight out of rehab, Rue goes to her local dealers / friends, Fezco and Ashtray, aka Fez and Ash. Also, I just want to talk a little bit more about Ashtray. A lot of people felt like the mere inclusion of Ashtray was stupid and made the show way more unrealistic, but none of the reviews I've seen mention that Ashtray is based off of a character in the original Israeli miniseries. So Rue goes to her dealers right after coming out of rehab, and she says before in narration that she has no intention of staying clean. Part of her justification would be that the world is coming to an end and she hasn't even graduated high school yet. Then we have Nate coming in. Rue says that apparently freshman year, he tried to finger her at the winter formal without her permission. This just sets the stage for what a great character he's going to be throughout the show. We learn that Nate is throwing a party at his friend McKay's house. They mention Maddie and how she broke up with Nate. Then Nate sees Jules for the first time and catcalls her as she's riding her bike. She falls off her bike after flicking him off. Now the focus goes to Jules. We learn that Jules moved from a nearby unnamed city with her father after her parents got divorced. Jules went to summer school with Kat, and that's how she gets invited to this party. Now, Jules is on this unnamed app, which is obviously Grindr. Oh, yeah, Jules is trans, if I didn't mention that before. But anyways, Jules is going through these messages that these men are sending her, which are extremely direct, and rightfully so. She blocks most of them, until she gets a message from Dominant Daddy that butters her up, calling her perfect and wanting to meet for a drink. Being flattered, she jumps at the opportunity and tells Kat she's going to skip the party. Now, the next scene is where we are properly introduced to Kat and Maddie. Maddie is feeling insecure about herself and her body because of Nate's previous mental abuse. Kat is encouraging her to quote-unquote catch a dick, and Maddie and the other girl with them point out that she's probably a virgin, so what does she know about getting over a breakup? Then Rue comes home from buying drugs and probably using those drugs, and her mother Leslie demands she takes a drug test. Then Rue goes to ask for urine from her childhood friend Lexi, who she is not very close to anymore. After Rue fools her mother, we go to Jules getting ready for her hookup with Dominant Daddy. She then goes to this hotel. There's a lot in the tone that this is not a good decision. Now we're at McKay's, where Nate and some other guys are slut-shaming Cassie and telling McKay that she's not worth his time, also revealing to McKay that lewd videos of her have been going around school. McKay is later talking with Cassie, which leads them to his bedroom. Then they have the most awkward sex. Also, they put in this one little detail that just makes me kind of mad. They're doing their thing, and McKay says, "Are you always this wet?" And Cassie replies, "Kinda, super embarrassing." And if that's not enough, McKay gets a little rough with Cassie and chokes her. He thought that's what she would like, just because of corn, let's call it. Sorry, YouTube is annoying. But anyways, they fortunately move on from that misunderstanding. Then next up, we come to this very uncomfortable scene where Jules meets with this much older man. After Rue hitches a ride with Kat and Maddie, we get back to Jules, and I just gotta say, it was because of this scene specifically that I had to put this series down for like a month. This scene was very unsettling and really shook me. So let's get into it, I guess. We start the scene with this guy's face not in frame. That's never great. We also have Jules sitting on the bed looking up at him just to emphasize the huge power imbalance between them. He asks questions about Jules, and she asks a question about him, and he deflects with a very demeaning question.
"Do you walk around like this?"
Then he tells her that she's beautiful, and then she just softens up and she gets that sweet validation. Then he goes into this little monologue about how her generation doesn't care about the rules and how he has to live out his real self within the confines of a grimy motel. He also gives her this super fucking patronizing boop on the nose. Then he sticks his thumb in her mouth. I don't want to show that, so here's some puppies or something. Then they have what looks to be very unsatisfying sex. He uses spit as lube, which is never acceptable, and just jams it in. Jules is clearly not having a good time. Then he lasts for about 5 strokes and he's done. This part is all accompanied by Rue's narration about how, when she was 5, Jules would pray to God that she would skip childhood and be 25, living with her best girlfriend, someone she could trust forever. And throughout this scene, there were no crazy visual effects, no music, it was just played straight. In this specific regard, there is a lot of overlap between the gay male and trans female experiences, and I guess that's what really hit home for me. I saw myself in this scene. I've been on Grindr and I've met with older men because I was desperate for some kind of physical intimacy and validation. I was of age, mind you, thank God. And then the night got weird, says Rue after this very weird scene. We then get a whole scene of Nate and Maddie making each other jealous. Maddie picks this guy out of the crowd and seduces him to get in the pool with her and, do that in the pool. Remember this guy, he'll come up later. Now we get the start of Kat's storyline for the show. Kat is in a room full of boys she doesn't know well. Always a great idea, right? These twins get to asking her if she's a slut, and Kat talks a big game, trying to impress these teenage boys. She says, "I'm a fucking savage." The guy across from her calls her out on this bold lie. Then this escalates to Kat losing her virginity, consensually, don't worry. We get this scene where Rue talks to Fez, and he is confessing to her about how her overdose made him feel uneasy and guilty because he really cares for her. Now we have Rue telling Fez the first time she tried any substance was when she had a panic attack that hospitalized her, and the hospital gave her liquid Valium. This is the scene where she talks about how that's the feeling she's been searching for. I think the point of focus and outrage for this scene is a little misguided. People think this scene glorifies drugs, but they're missing the point that it wasn't Rue that sought out drugs in the first place. She was given an addictive substance by a hospital. At least in America, they give out narcotics and Percocets to their patients like it's nothing, and people get addicted to them once they're out of the hospital. I had a surgery in the Dominican Republic, and my doctor made a comment about how despicable she thinks the American healthcare system is, since it creates addicts every day, and was adamant about not giving me Percocets. So Jules got to the party. Maddie is doing the thing with that guy in the pool. Infuriated, Nate goes to the kitchen and has a fit like the bitch he is. Unfortunately, he tells everyone to get out of the kitchen. Jules stays because Nate is in the way and she can't really go around this extremely angry, violent, massive guy. Nate then sees Jules and targets her, asks her who she is, literally cornering her. She insists that she's just minding her own business, and Nate replies, "Nobody who looks like you is minding their own business," most likely a comment about her being trans. The way that he intimidates her in this scene is threatening yet has sexual undertones. This is very realistic. Most of the men who assault trans women are the men who are sexually involved with them. He then says something that's a little more sexual as he's threatening her. Then good old Jules grabs a knife and starts threatening Nate. Nate, now shitting his britches, recoils and swears it was a joke. Then Jules cuts herself and dabs the blood on Nate's shoulder. I love her. After that lovely scene, Kat comes out of the room having lost her virginity, tells her friend about it, and she's elated, but asked how it went. She kind of hesitantly responded with it being nice. This later turns into her whole character development for the season. Jules leaves the party for obvious reasons, and Rue, extremely impressed, tries to catch Jules before she leaves. Rue comments about how she handled the situation, they introduce themselves, and Rue asks Jules if she could go home with her. That was probably the party favors talking, but Jesus Christ, is that bold. I have no idea why Jules says yes. She literally had one shot while she was at the party and was there for maybe 5 minutes. She couldn't have been drunk at that point. At Jules' house, Rue dresses her wound. Then we get a little montage, I don't know what else to call it, of the characters at this time in the morning. Nate comes home. He goes up the stairs, and we see the older man that Jules met up with is in fact Nate's father. Now we go back to Jules and Rue. They lie in bed together looking at each other, and Rue asks Jules if she wants to get high. And that's the end of the pilot. As you saw, there are a lot of different plot points going on and intertwining between characters. The next part of the video, I will be going deeper about the main cast of characters that have the most significance to the plot, and I will be going in the order of significance. At face value, Cassie isn't really an interesting character, at least this season. For most of season 1, she is moping about her boyfriend, who she feels isn't taking the relationship seriously and is ashamed of her. I guess to me, in my first viewing of the show, I saw her as boring because she was very passive in her own story. She doesn't really defend her own narrative. Up until the midpoint of the season, she feels like this mopey sad girl just down on her luck because she's an objectified pretty girl. For the first half of the season, we don't know much about her. Hell, just from the first episode, all we know about her is that she made naughty videos with her old boyfriends and that she has a wet-ass pussy. We do not get much of Cassie's struggles in the first 3 episodes. Instead, we get a setup for her character as the pretty girl. In episode 4, we see a turning point for Cassie as a character. The carnival episode was an extremely packed episode and a monster of a storytelling device. It's at this point that I realize Cassie's narrative and conflict are with the male gaze, and how just being in the body that she is in makes the men around her treat her so differently. Cassie is upset at McKay because he will not admit to the relationship when Nate asks if they are dating, so she storms off and tries to have a good time to spite McKay. She flirts with this boy, Daniel, after taking Molly. Then she publicly orgasms on a carousel. Then, out of her post-nut clarity, she realizes she's making a scene and feels ashamed. Even though Cassie's main conflict is navigating the male gaze, it is the gaze of the men in the show that is mostly fixated on her. The actual camera isn't that concerned with her beauty, it is more concerned with the narrative, what is actually happening to her. Yes, Cassie is having a big O on the carousel, but the camera doesn't really linger on intimate or erogenous parts of her body. It just quickly shows us certain areas so we can deduce what is happening. The camera doesn't really show Cassie as this hot babe that any guy would be lucky to be with, and really try to cater to the male gaze with her scenes. What it does instead is show how the male gaze of the men around her is affecting her. Cassie is beautiful and sought after, but this doesn't give her a glamorous life, and she doesn't have everything together or really have an experience anyone should envy. We get a glimpse of how being conventionally attractive can be problematic in just about most of Cassie's social life. In episode 6, we get a non-linear storyline about her time at a Halloween party with McKay. She wears this skimpy outfit and McKay is uncomfortable with that, so he makes her change. That says more about him though. McKay is just really insecure about himself and he bottles up his emotions. As Cassie and McKay are being intimate in his dorm, McKay's frat brothers haze him and humiliate him in front of Cassie. Feeling emasculated, he goes to the bathroom to compose himself and fight back his tears. Then once he's composed, he comes out of the bathroom like nothing is wrong. Cassie wants to talk about what happened, but McKay wants to just act like everything is okay and he wants to start doing the do again. Even though Cassie's natural inclination is to just talk and process and offer support, but no, McKay needs to reclaim the masculinity that has been stripped from him. So instead of having a heart-to-heart with his girlfriend, he makes her uncomfortable and pressures her into having relations. And then, after insisting, he has issues rising to the occasion. Then he does the deed and Cassie is completely turned off, and afterwards even feels used and starts crying, so clearly things are not all good. McKay thinks that having Cassie as a girlfriend gives him bragging rights to all the men around him, but McKay is insecure about how other men talk about Cassie and how they objectify her. So this leads to contradicting treatment, like treating her well in one moment and using her to make him feel more like a man in the other, which causes a lot of frustration for Cassie. After that ordeal, she wants to forget about her problems and tries to have some harmless fun with Daniel. Now, Daniel is a cunt. Daniel also wanted to use Cassie, however, he wanted to go a little farther than what Cassie was comfortable with. Then, feeling rejected, Daniel explodes with this incel rant about how all the men around her just want to use her for her body because she has nothing else of substance to offer.
You think I'm here because I'm interested in you? And what you have to say, or what you think about things as if you're so fucking interesting? Fuck, are you dumb?
Which can be traumatizing for a teenager to hear. This pretty much solidifies her belief that her body only gives her worth. I can't even imagine what that does to your psyche. Like, fuck off, Daniel. Now in episode 7, we get Rue's narration about Cassie's upbringing and learn about her father and growing up pretty. Cassie has a pretty rough home life around the time she hits puberty. Cassie's parents have had a rough relationship since she was a child. He became more distant after her parents divorced, and then even more so after a long stay in the ICU left him addicted to narcotics. The last time she ever saw her father was so he could steal some fine china and silverware. And this scene is chilling. Cassie is excited to see her loving father, and what she sees standing in front of her is a sunken-eyed man with needle scars that she vaguely recognizes. The show doesn't outright say it, but Rue's narration is written in a way that implies Cassie is looking for the love that she is missing from her father. She loved every guy she ever dated, most likely because she desperately needed that love back. But all the guys she ever dates don't really see her for her. They just see her for her body and what dating her means for the men around them. At the end of her backstory in episode 7, it is revealed that she is pregnant. She wants to think about being a mother for a moment, probably because Cassie sees motherhood as a way out of being objectified, or feeling like she'll have a new purpose or worth as a mother. That's really been her arc. She wants to be important to somebody. She wants to feel like she matters. Because being a mom doesn't require you to be hot. It requires so many other qualities of your personhood. Later on in the episode, she finally tells McKay. He freaks out, understandably, but he gives her this rude, demeaning reality check, which kind of speaks to how he views her.
I don't even think you want to have this baby, okay? It's not a fucking fairy tale. Like, this may seem all cute and cuddly to you, but this is real shit.
I've been giving McKay a lot of flack in this video, but I do like him to some extent. He's definitely one of the better male characters in the season. He seems like a nice guy, but not nice enough to go against toxic masculinity and question male peer pressure to treat his girlfriend like she's her own person 100% of the time. This is pretty much the end of Cassie's narrative. She does terminate her pregnancy, but I'm going to stay in my lane and not talk about how that might have made her feel, because I don't have a uterus and I won't ever have to make such a decision. I can just imagine how hard that would be and the kind of mixed feelings one would have after going through something like that. Now, Kat is one of the characters I like the most. I feel more naturally inclined to root for her because I see myself more in her lived experience. She's struggled with her weight, she's a Tumblr girl and a fanfiction writer like some of my friends. I also see a lot of myself in her character arc. Her entire journey this season is her finding herself as a sexual being, as a fat girl. In the first episode, she talks a huge game about being with guys, though being a virgin. Then she loses her virginity later in the episode. Cassie was told she was gorgeous and perfect, while in Kat's backstory, she's had a relationship end because of her weight. But we see how both characters navigate the male gaze. Kat, because of past experiences, feels like a booger. Her interests and her personality reflect this. Kat seems loosely modeled after an N-log, not like other girls, but without the internalized misogyny, it seems. She wrote One Direction smut and was Tumblr famous, definitely not the mainstream interests. She goes through this journey of feeling no one would give her the time of day because of her size, but is surprised to find that people find her attractive. A lewd video of her gets posted on the internet and it becomes a conversation throughout the school, making Kat mortified and thinking she would surely be a laughingstock and pariah. The video was taken down, however, a copy was posted on another account. Kat sees the comments, and she doesn't see that the men watching the videos are repulsed. On the contrary, they're emphatically attracted to her body. She later makes her own videos and then starts camming. Through camming, she finds out she enjoys having power over men. While Cassie goes through the male gaze and just clunkily navigates through it, Kat leans into it and uses it as a form of validation and confidence boost. I really wish she could have done something else instead of camming as a minor, but that doesn't make good TV, now does it? This is kind of where we get into the conversation of whether showing off your body is the right avenue to empowerment. Well, for minors, it's definitely not okay to post nudes on the internet, but anyway, Kat definitely does have this liberating realization that there are men who find her attractive regardless of her size. That's where it starts anyway. Through this realization, she starts presenting very differently as this badass with confidence, wearing bold colors and fetish wear and bold makeup. But through this, she develops a very one-dimensional understanding of men, which through most of the season sees as the truth. She feels like she's cracked the code. Through camming, she learns that men, to some extent, are horny bastards that are desperate for the attention of women. This is definitely a divisive talking point among liberal and conservative spaces, whether presenting yourself as a hypersexual person is empowering or not. I believe the person's upbringing has a lot to do with it. For Kat, she did not grow up conventionally attractive. Simply grabbing the attention of pretty much any man gives her the validation that she is attractive. Then we see this search for validation turn into this reassurance that getting a man's attention is not that hard. So in turn, that can lead to her feeling empowered. I personally think owning your sexuality is inherently empowering. Also showing off your body, not because you necessarily want attention, but because you love and celebrate your body. I wish Kat would lean more into that. While all of this is happening, Kat meets this boy Ethan in her science class, I think. And he takes a liking to her even before she goes through the whole personality change. Euphoria kind of shows the viewers that Kat is doing all this illegal camming instead of being with a boy her age like Ethan. Now, I know that's totally pick-me boy propaganda, but honestly, I just want Kat to stop doing illegal things, so I was rooting for her to be with Ethan. At the carnival, she spends time with Ethan and she finds herself liking him more. They have fun riding the rides together after Jules just ditches her for a route. Like, seriously, Jules, what the fuck? She is having a great time with Ethan, which is really adorable, but then she sees Ethan talking to a pretty skinny girl. She just wanted to pass a message on to his sister, but Kat, still insecure, storms off and ditches Ethan. This is also part of her one-dimensional view of men. They're all pigs, and they think with their dicks, etc., etc. Now, this is a pretty pivotal part of the season for her because now, until the end of the season, everything she does is in spite of Ethan. After she storms off in a huff, she finds this guy that had a lot of cred for having a large member and does the do with him. He also has a lot of cred of having a high body count. Basically, being with this guy is supposed to be some kind of conquest. After they were done, and they got done pretty quickly, mind you, he asked if she climaxed and she said no and walks off all smug. Which is such an odd flex. I have heard this is just really clunky writing and just screams that the script was written by a man. Because why would a woman admit that she didn't come and walk off all smug? Like, yeah, I just did that. I have never walked away from an unsatisfying encounter like that. But I guess through this, she has a realization that men are kind of pathetic and desperate. So this would be very freeing in a sense that not all attractive men are going to be a good time. Just because he's attractive doesn't mean he'll be able to please you. So for Kat, someone who has worried about her desirability for most of her adolescence, at this point is finding out that none of that really matters, and that is such a weight lifted off your chest. While this can be freeing, she is not using this self-found power in a way that is healthy or responsible, since she's acting out of spite of this boy that she thought wronged her. Kat has convinced herself that all she wants is sex, and part of that is because she probably feels like that is all she has to offer to men, since they don't care about anything else. Then we get another scene where she walks away all confidently from another unsatisfying sexual encounter. Seriously, she meets this guy and he finishes in like 10 seconds. Like, oh yeah, that was so good, he couldn't help himself. Unfortunately, I think people do think this is impressive sometimes. Usually those who are not as experienced think this is a good thing, which is understandable, she's not that experienced. But the fact that the show keeps painting this like this is empowering for her is kind of concerning, but that could be the point. Kat is being gaslit by society thinking what she's doing is empowering. Then we have the Halloween party. Kat and Ethan are both there, and Ethan asks her about what happened at the carnival. She gets defensive, assuming he knows what he did, and says that if he wants her to, do things to him, he should just ask, because the chances of them dating are 0. Then, after this, Ethan chugs some liquid courage and takes her to the bathroom to make out and do stuff. Kat proceeds to ask for his body count. He hesitates, and she tells him that she doesn't do it with virgins. Then begins this whole awkward, insecure back and forth of Kat trying to find out his intentions. Long story short, he tries to prove her wrong and goes down south, which is a standout compared to the other hookups she has done. None of them have cared about her pleasure, but Ethan does. He takes a break to, clean himself, then Kat runs off. After that whole ordeal, she hooks up with Daniel. You all remember Daniel, right? Well, he got what he wanted that night, just not from Cassie. Then, afterwards, she reveals to Daniel and to the audience that they used to date in middle school. That's right, he's the kid that dumped her for being fat, and surprise, surprise, he remembers none of it. This is a huge eye-opening moment for Kat. She learns that she can't let what people do to her have so much power over her, because in the long haul, she's usually not even an afterthought. After this, she does one last cam session with this man who's willing to pay her a lot of money. However, he remains anonymous and alters his voice and makes her strip, which she had never done in a cam session. The whole scene is pretty scary, which can be a reality of doing that kind of work on the internet. I believe this scares her out of camming because we do not see her camming anymore afterwards. Now, for the last episode at the winter formal, I think it is, Kat takes Ethan aside and tells him the truth about why she's been so terrible to him. She wanted to hurt him as much as he hurt her, even though he did nothing wrong. Ethan reassures her that he has liked her ever since he sat next to her, and even if they won't be together forever, he still wants to give it a shot. All around, a very sweet moment and a nice little bow at the end of Kat's storyline of the season. After living through this hypersexual period in her life, she has learned to balance sex and romance. So next, we have the next most important character in the lineup, Maddie. I will be honest, I don't have much in my notes about her because the script really skims on her character, but she's a huge part of the show's popularity and so many people love her, so I had to talk about her. Maddie is kind of a vibe for the wannabe sugar babies. Her backstory shows that she is a girly girl, doesn't dream of labor, she wants to be taken care of. Her mother worked as an esthetician and she saw these rich women with rich husbands, and she noticed that these women did nothing. So she aspired to be like these women. She felt as though she could have an even better life than these women because they didn't have confidence, while Maddie had an incomparable confidence. But that's really all we get about her. After that, it goes into her relationship with Nate. Maddie, in the whole grand scheme of the entire season, she's just a plot device for Nate to drive his story forward. This might be the reason she gets the kind of plot in the show. Her character arc could be a critique on choice feminism, how the choices she made out of the desire to be taken care of by a man led to an abusive relationship and making the decision to stay in one. For those who are not familiar with the definition, choice feminism is the individualistic approach of feminism with a philosophy that what a woman chooses to do is inherently feminist because she made the decision herself. Also, for those who don't know, this is pretty much the mainstream practice of feminism at this point in time, but this is under discussion in feminist circles since women's decisions can still be aligned with ancient oppressive patriarchal norms. After the first episode, Maddie gets back with Nate. The reason is not explained, but it could be the fact that Nate comes from a well-off family and he's her ticket to living a life of doing nothing. Maddie is young, but she is far from stupid. She knows what she wants, and at the end of the day, when she's not angry at him and more level-headed, she will go back to him because Nate is the most logical choice to give her what she wants out of life. That and Nate is attractive. That definitely helps in this case. But through the entirety of episode 2, Nate is sneaking around and texting another person the entire time he and Maddie are on a date, which leads to her snooping on his phone in episode 3. What she finds is multiple men's, between me down there. Then we have the carnival in episode 4, and Maddie's storyline was her abusive relationship with Nate. At the carnival, she makes a scene because she was hurt by the fact that Nate's parents don't like her. She does this after taking a few party favors, very her. Then after she makes the scene, Nate pulls her aside and chokes her and pins her to the side of a trailer. Maddie, being vindictive, now decides to confront Nate about the pictures. Nate gets all sheepish and wants her to stay with him. Here is where you see the gears turning in her head. She's starting to get an insight into how messed up Nate really is, and I'm sure she's wondering how well she can keep things in her favor. The weekend after the carnival, she passes out because it was hot and she didn't want to take off her turtleneck and hoodie, so the paramedics saw the bruises on her neck. The school is mandated to report signs of abuse, and Maddie's mother wants to press charges on Nate. Maddie desperately doesn't want this to happen. She wants to go along like everything is okay. Probably because she thinks that she has everything under control. She has a history of getting what she wants from boys, so she thinks she has this situation handled. She is a kid, so I would say that is pretty typical for someone her age. Do I think she has everything under control? Of course not. Nate is a ticking time bomb, and she's at eye level with his hips. She's in over her head. She is brought in for further questioning, and they take pictures of her bruises. She is forced to cooperate, which looks pretty traumatic, but the investigator taking the pictures tells her that whoever did this doesn't love her. I think she does love Nate in her weird transactional sort of way, but I think the reason why she wants to be with him so bad is because she sees how her parents are with each other. Maddie's father is practically mute on the couch, barely acknowledging Maddie's mother. This would be a case why someone who doesn't have a history with abuse would want to stay in an abusive relationship. She wants literally anything else besides her parents' relationship. Anything would be more appealing than what she's grown up with. I'm assuming her relationship with Nate is the most serious relationship she has ever been in, so this is really her only reference for a different kind of relationship. She refuses to end up like her mother. She sees Nate's toxic possessiveness of her as something aspirational. Nate would happily do terrible things for her, and this makes her feel like she has worth. Maddie's father doesn't even think his own wife is worth talking to, so she sees this as a huge step up. But in reality, I don't even want to call what Nate has for her love, because I don't believe he even respects her as a person. He sees her as an object. I feel like Nate just sees all women as means to prove his masculinity to society, but I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll talk more about him in just a moment. I would say in this scenario, these would be the repercussions of Maddie's choices. She wants to stay with an abusive partner, but this decision is only informed by Maddie's specific worldview, and this is at the cost of her safety and overall autonomy, making her decisions not inherently feminist. After everything, when the allegations are settled, Nate is still the same person. Nothing has changed, he still has the same issues, and things will probably only get worse with time. Maddie finally realizes this and breaks up with Nate, not without taking a DVD for some leverage so she could fuck with him later. What was on the DVD though, we'll talk about that in a second. In the last episode, they try to make each other jealous, dancing with other people. After a while, they end up dancing with each other. Maddie talks with him frankly, and Nate responds in his own way that still feels vulnerable, but you can tell this is more for closure. As a viewer, you feel as though she'll stay away this time. Now, for the big bad of this season, Nate Jacobs. Going into this, I just really need to say Nate Jacobs is absolutely terrible. I want to call him a monster, but that would only dehumanize him and distract from the fact that he is a product of our society. But anyway, let's get into Nate. Episode 2 actually starts with his backstory. Being a very smart kid, he figures out how his dad hides his special DVDs. What he sees is visual evidence of his father having relations with multiple men, cis women and trans women. Just seeing a parent having sex alone is traumatizing, but multiple partners, none of them your mother, and most of them men and trans women, especially when your father is raising you to be an all-American manly man. He even drilled into his head that no one would ever root for him. He didn't really go into much detail about that, but I'm assuming he meant that he is white, handsome, from a well-off family, and he is physically fit. That might mean he is not the underdog in any way, so people will be gunning to see him fail. Mind you, he tells this to him when he's 12. Like, yikes. Nate is also extremely uncomfortable around male genitalia. This is most likely because he likes male genitalia and he has issues with it. He makes sure to look straight ahead in the locker room. I honestly wish it didn't seem like Nate's attraction to male genitalia is linked to his childhood trauma, just because the concept of men who like male genitalia but not men is such a foreign concept to the mainstream. I would prefer when people talk about Nate's attraction to not be able to make the connection of, oh, he just likes dick because he's traumatized. What does that say about me then? Before anyone leaves a comment saying, if you like dick, you're gay, I've talked to many men who have no interest in dating men but will date trans women and cis women. Being a man attracted to women does not make you gay. Talk to any gay man on the apps, they'll tell you all about it. Anyway, Nate is also extremely particular about his likes and dislikes about women. For example, he likes tennis skirts but hates sneakers on women. He also hates girls that act like boys. He absolutely despises body hair, just to name a few things. Maddie stood out to him because she was basically hairless. He walked her home every day. It made him feel good that he was able to protect her. He wanted to protect her from all the dangers that men could put her through. Purity is also extremely important to him. He loved that Maddie was a virgin, even though she lied, because she knew that guys are obsessed with purity. So we already have a pretty clear picture of who he is. Oh my god. I just checked my notes and I said he probably says the N-word because he has black friends. Let me stop. But yes, a big part of his plot this season is that he's trying to get with Jules. Like I said, I personally don't think Nate is gay. I just think he's struggling with his attraction to male genitalia. I base this mostly on his likes and dislikes he has for women. He is very particular about women wearing very proper high feminine clothing, presenting very quote-unquote put together, and his disgust of mannish behavior and body hair is a tell to me that he doesn't really like men. I mean, sure, he might be thinking about being with men, but he is drawn to Jules. One thing that I've heard about men who are typically chasers of trans women are usually drawn to how much effort they put into performing femininity. This effort is usually out of an attempt to pass a cis woman and not have to be called sir at the store or something, so a trans girl like Jules would align with his interests. Even after that whole incident with him and Jules at the party, he starts talking to Jules through Grindr under the pretense that he is a teenage boy who goes to another school and his name is Tyler. Now, Tyler is the name of this guy. You remember this guy? I told you to keep a mental note of him earlier in the video. So this Tyler guy does the do with Maddie at McKay's party. If your ex-girlfriend did this to spite you, what would you do if you were in Nate's shoes? I really hope the answer is just to be pissed for a few days and move on. But is that what Nate does? Absolutely not. What he does is stalk this man, finds out where he works, finds out where he lives, breaks in, and not only intimidates him, but also blackmails him to make sure he doesn't go running to the police. So Tyler is like 21 and Maddie is 17, I believe. So Nate is able to turn him in for statutory you-know-what. Tyler did not know Maddie's age, by the way. So what Nate does is he beats Tyler to a bloody pulp in his own apartment, and this scene is very charged. As a viewer, you don't really know if he's going to get sexually violent. Also, as Nate's beating this man, he is calling him the F-slur, which is most likely projecting those feelings onto this man to somehow relieve himself of any gayness, so to say. After this happens, Nate takes a shower in this guy's apartment and dips. Everything Nate has done in this scene is out of some crazy power trip. As he is with Maddie after assaulting Tyler, he even asks how it felt being with him, which, you know, sounds kinda gay. While cuckolding is a thing, I don't think he would have done all of this if he was into that. So now, let's get into more detail about Nate's online relationship with Jules. When talking to Jules, he seems like another person. Very sweet, and he feels like he can be honest with her and feels more like himself. Ironic, I know. But outside of lying about his identity and the fact that he is in a relationship, I think this is true to an extent. Usually closeted guys like this are so sweet and caring, but it is all in this little vacuum. All of this kindness and consideration is only present when there are no eyes on you. All of that goes away when they have to go back to their lives. Very similar to Nate's dad and his line about how he has to live his life in the confines of four walls. Outside of those walls are society's expectations of you, and Nate doesn't seem to be brave enough to go against those expectations. Episode 4, at the carnival, he puts his hands on Maddie. Maddie then confronts him about the pictures on his phone. He apologizes to her, but most likely because he knows she could tell his secret to other people. But of course, he's not completely honest with her. After the carnival, Jules goes to meet who she thinks is Tyler, but obviously Nate shows up. Jules is distraught with disbelief. He tries to convince her to give him a chance. He says something really sweet, and I feel like what he said was true.
I kind of feel closer to you than I do to anyone in the whole world.
And this is the only time we ever see Nate be vulnerable and completely himself with someone. It just sucks that it was all based on a lie. Jules rejects him still, and of course, being the person he is, he had something prepared just in case she rejected him. He blackmails Jules and tells her that he will turn her in for distributing child P-word if she ever told a soul what happened. This really turns my stomach. Nate is so guarded that he is willing to ruin Jules' life out of fear she would ruin his. It's really not going to get any better from here. Nate is terrible, and what makes him even more terrifying is that he is very smart and calculated in everything he does. After that night, Nate gets brought in for questioning because of Maddie's bruises. During questioning, Nate is extremely composed, and he really knows how to hide his emotions, and he is a skilled liar. This is when he tells the police that it could have been another guy she had been with while they were broken up that could have assaulted her. Then in episode 6, we see a non-linear story of how Nate plays out his despicable plan. He has Maddie leave a statement that it was Tyler who assaulted her. Nate had her say that Tyler had been obsessed with her since McKay's party in episode 1. Then he has Jules come in to make a statement as a witness to all of this. And he has Tyler turn himself in because, you know, if Jules and Tyler did not comply, they would both go to jail and be put on a registry. A truly disgusting plan, Nate. 10 out of 10 on the psycho scale. Great job. I hate it so much, and I'm sure everyone watching it did too. Oh, as well as the Halloween party, he had the audacity to show up in old-timey prison black and white stripes. Also, Maddie is dressed as Iris from Taxi Driver. For those who don't know, Iris was a teenage prostitute played by Jodie Foster. I believe that was her first role at the time, and she was 12 years old during filming. So I guess they dressed up as a prisoner and his jailbait? Sam Levinson, what the fuck? I need an explanation for this, because what the hell? While the big guy gets off scot-free, do his personal issues end? Of course not. He is still trying desperately to hold on to his masculinity. He can't stay hard with Maddie when they're doing their thing. He's frustrated about what people think of him. Yes, this comes to him in the bedroom, because if he can't perform, he's not a man, so that just adds to the pressure in the bedroom. Maddie starts talking about his sexuality, and she doesn't want him to think that him questioning his sexuality is a big deal. This just gets him extremely frustrated and violent. I do think he finds Maddie attractive, but from what we've seen in the show, I don't think he really likes her as a person very much. She picks up on that, takes the DVD, which has Jules and Nate's dad doing the do, and they break up again for good this time. After this, he wins a football game, dad is not impressed. Then afterwards, they talk about the game, he has nothing good to say, and Nate, having no idea how to use his words, tries to fight his dad and has a tantrum, freaking out his father. His dad pretty much has this moment of, oh my god, what have I done to my son? Maddie might have learned something, but Nate hasn't. He's trapped in this vicious cycle, and he's not brave enough to go against the grain of what society expects of him. Like I said earlier, Nate is not a monster. He's not crazy. He is a product of our society. Yes, this is a show, but society makes tons of Nates every day. Men who become violent because they have no outlet for their bottled up emotions, or become so frustrated with what society and other men expect of them. So now we are going to talk about my personal favorite character of the show, Jules. People talk about all the interesting makeup that came out of this show, but in reality, it all came from Jules. I could honestly gush all day about her makeup, hairstyles, and fashion choices, but we'd be here all day. Jules is an interesting character because you don't know too much about her. You see her a lot throughout the season, but you don't really get much context for some of her actions throughout season 1 proper. We do not really know the motivations of some of the things she does, nor do we know a lot of the details of her background. We are left to speculate with Rue. For most of the season, Jules feels like she is just at an arm's length from the viewer. Her arc this season mostly consists of her interactions with Nate, her friendship with Rue, and her struggles with compulsory heterosexuality. And the thing about me is that I absolutely foam at the mouth for sapphic content, so this slow burn between Rue and Jules was just so great to watch, and I was screaming at my TV whenever Jules gal-palled Rue. So after the disturbing events of episode 1, Jules and Rue become best friends, gal pals, if you will. This is when she starts talking to Tyler, which is revealed to be Nate at the end of the episode. So for the sake of not going back and forth, I will talk about all the Nate drama now and the compet stuff later. Jules starts talking to quote-unquote Tyler in episode 2, and by episode 3, enough time had passed by where she found herself falling in love with Tyler. I honestly don't blame her. she is talking to a guy her own age that actually wants to get to know her, talks to her, and tells her how much he likes her. Basically, this is all she's really wanted, especially since the only interactions she's had with boys had been with adult men, and these were exclusively sexual encounters. In the special, she even said she got to know Tyler better than she got to know Rue. In episode 4, lots of stuff happens. Cal, Nate's father, finds out that Jules is a high school student and has a heart attack, practically. He goes to talk to her, begging her not to ruin his life. Jules doesn't hold it against him and assures him he has nothing to worry about. Clearly, she's a different person than Nate. Later that night, she goes to meet Tyler, and it is Nate that shows up. Jules is in disbelief. She thought she was going to have this fairy tale meeting with the love of her life, but she's greeted by some guy that tried to assault her. She rejects him. You can tell on her face how devastated she is. After this, Nate blackmails her because, he has to protect his image. She doesn't really interact with Nate again until episode 6, where she has to leave a statement to basically ruin some guy's life. That's what made the whole process for her so heartbreaking. She was in love with someone who didn't exist. It was like she had to mourn the death of her lover. Now for Jules' relationship with Rue. This never had any hope of being a normal friendship due to Rue's situation and the fact that Rue liked her the second she saw her. She literally invited herself to Jules's home the same night they met. This is not gal pal behavior. However, for most of the earlier episodes, Jules is in total denial, not even oblivious. She's just in denial. Here's where compulsory heterosexuality comes in. Two words separately mean the obligation to perform or be heterosexual, but this is a theory usually more specifically used for lesbians and queer women. It is the theory that heterosexuality is forced on women by the patriarchy, which can be an explanation for why lesbians and queer women not just come out, but come to terms and realize their own sexuality as late as their 30s or even later. In Jules's case, I think she is bisexual and hasn't really considered women as a viable option for relationships and romance. Later in the season, she has a conversation with a girl and talks about how she wants to conquer men, because in her mind, if she can conquer men, she can conquer femininity, which is a common thought for a young trans girl to have. She's focused on being a girl and focuses on what society expects of girls, and what society expects of girls is to be with boys. So she's so busy trying to conquer men, and the thought of a man being attracted to you and wanting to be with you is what gives her validation that she is indeed a woman. This is most likely what is in her head, and she is in total denial about Rue's feelings for her. The writing is really all over the fucking walls. For example, in episode 2, while hanging out with Rue, Jules says she's going back to her house to watch anime, a casual statement. Am I insinuating that if you like anime, you're a big ol' les? Yes, I am insinuating that. No, but seriously, the anime she mentions is none other than Madoka Magica. For those of you who don't know, Madoka Magica is a great anime that the creator says is not a lesbian anime, or Yuri if you will. But this anime won a poll for Best Yuri Anime in the late 2010s. So in the community, it is acknowledged as a lesbian story and well beloved by sapphics. Watching that back and hearing her say the name of that anime sent me. Sam Levinson left that in for the sapphic obsessed weebs like me. But yes, that little thing was huge foreshadowing that she is going to end up liking girls. There are also other things that was telling about their relationship. When Rue mentions that she's told her mom about Jules, Jules makes sure to acknowledge that moment to make her feel bashful. There's also the sleeping together, the intense hugging, and the forehead touching. There were also things that just made the relationship really intense. The amount of time they spent together, how intimate they were with each other. Then it leads to Rue kissing her, which felt like a natural progression of the scene. Friends don't forehead touch like this.
Gal pals.
Before Tyler, she even thought about spending the rest of her life with Rue, living together, maybe dating other people, but still sleeping in the same bed. That sounds like a cover for old-timey spinsters. Yeah, she lives with her best friend, and they sleep in the same bed, but it's completely platonic, I'm sure. Even after the kiss, she runs to Rue because she is so excited to see her again, and she is very quick to brush off the kiss and pretend like nothing happened. In Jules' special, we learned that this was because she is desperate not to lose her. Then, after she found out that Tyler was Nate, she went straight to Rue. Mind you, Kat is her friend too, but if you barely pay attention to the show, you wouldn't really pick that up, because I could count maybe 4 scenes where Jules and Kat are on the screen together. After this, her friendship with Rue starts to get very real, because Jules is becoming the reason for her sobriety. This is way too much pressure for a teenager. She loves Rue, but she has the fear if they have some kind of falling out, she's going to relapse. In episode 6, Jules starts buckling under the pressure. With this on top of Nate making her ruin someone's life, Jules was at a breaking point. Being very distraught, she drank so much at this party that she became a burden to Rue. Jules was trying to have a good time because everything was in shambles. One really fun thing about this episode, which is the epitome of men writing women having breakdowns, is Jules being piss drunk and she jumps in a pool and starts reciting Shakespeare.
Too unadvised, too sudden, too like the lightning which doth cease to be.
Of course, it's Romeo and Juliet. She is wearing Juliet's angel costume from the 1996 movie adaptation. She is reciting lines from Act 2, Scene 2. The context of these lines is that Romeo had just swore that Juliet will be his, and this is her rebuttal in fear that things are moving too quickly. I think this is a great moment because these lines sum up how Jules feels in this moment. She feels trapped. She is all of a sudden so important to Rue, and she is directly related to her sobriety. She feels suffocated. After this, she goes off to the city where she lived before and hangs out with her other trans friend. They hang out with this girl, Anna, and she talks to Jules about her views on femininity and women and questioning why she feels like she has to be with men to be feminine. This whole thing feels very charged, and you could tell they have chemistry. It seems like Jules is into Black Girls. They all go to the club, and Jules ends up hooking up with Anna. After this, in episode 8, she brings it up to Rue very casually. Rue, of course, felt a certain way about this, but they never put a label on anything or talked about what their relationship was. In episode 5, Jules' father asked if her and Rue were a thing, and she denied. So there was clearly some kind of dissonance to each other's perception of their whole arrangement. After the dance, Rue suggests to run away together to the city, but Rue has second thoughts, and Jules leaves her at the station, which we never get a concrete answer as to why, which is so annoying. One thing that I've heard is that Jules is a villain throughout the season, appealing for some people who desperately want some trans characters that aren't boring goody two-shoes that will never do anything wrong, but I personally do not fall in this camp of thought. I just think Jules is misunderstood and kind of lives in her own head. In Jules' special, she says a lot of things that contextualizes her actions a lot better and just gives her character a better foundation. Hunter Schafer, the actress that plays Jules, actually co-wrote the episode with Sam Levinson. From the special, we learn more about her mother, her being an alcoholic, and for some reasons not said outright, she wants no contact with her mother. One of them probably being that she admitted her to a psych ward when she was a preteen. We see her deny contact with her mother when she comes to visit, reassuring Jules that she is doing much better and that she wants to make amends. Jules goes up to her room and loudly says some hurtful things to her father about her mother. Hearing all of this, Jules' mother leaves upset because her own child wants nothing to do with her. Some unknown time later, Jules' father receives a call about Jules' mother, possibly alluding that she drank herself to death. This was also right before the Halloween party in episode 6, so another reason for Jules to drink her problems away like she did that night. Her therapist points out how Rue and her mother are very similar. That could be why Jules is drawn to her. Jules is obviously in denial about how similar they are. She also never wanted to tell Rue about her mother's addiction out of fear that Rue would think Jules is constantly comparing them. We learned that Jules did feel weird about the kiss, and she left voice messages to Rue so she could try to repair things. She actually wanted to kiss Rue long before she kissed her. She also loved Rue so much that she couldn't fathom Rue loving her as much as she did. Then we are left to infer that she loved Rue so much even though she had loved Tyler and had been with Anna. It's pretty clear that Jules is polyamorous, but she navigates her life as if most people in society are not monogamous. So in this aspect, I would say that she was just thoughtless and inconsiderate, which I guess can get you pegged as a villain for some people. Now, we are finally at the protagonist of the entire show, Rue. With Rue, I'm going to be working backward a little bit. I'm going to start with her special. These specials were added because of the delay of season 2 due to the pandemic, but what these specials do is tie up some plot holes and addresses some of the controversies that the show got flack for, in my opinion. The special doesn't necessarily excuse Rue's actions, it provides context for them, as she sits across from Ali trying to rationalize her drug use, trying to quote-unquote find a middle ground. The entire special seems to be about the two of them addressing Rue's relapse and how they can move on from that. This show has gotten a lot of negative critiques on its portrayals of drug use. How Rue's point of view on drugs isn't entirely negative, and this can be seen as romanticizing. However, there seems to be this expectation from audiences that Rue should be on this moral high ground and completely disregards that she's a kid. Here's where this turns into a paradox, because Rue is the teen that these audiences have in mind when they're speaking against the romanticization of drug use. This is so prevalent in the writing for her. A scene that I want to bring up is the scene where she suggests to Jules that they should get inner lip tattoos of each other's names. We see a little clip of them getting it done, but in the special, Rue confesses to Ali that it never happened and it was merely a suggestion. What this means is that Rue is an unreliable narrator in her own story. Not everything that she says or shows us, the audience, is to be trusted. She even discloses this in the first episode. That kind of speaks some truth to the experience of adolescence. Teens live in a world of their own creation, where they know best and they're perfectly capable of managing themselves, and nothing bad or long-lasting could possibly come from their actions. Then you have Ali, who I would argue is an audience proxy, or I think at least should be seen as one. Throughout the entire series, I would say not even just the special, Ali is bursting her little naive teenage bubble, calling her out on her shit. Like making Rue realize that Gia finding her overdosed and having to call the police will probably scar her for the rest of her life. Ali reminds her of the consequences of her actions, discourages her from having a love life in her early journey of sobriety. We need to see her as this naive kid who made some bad decisions during a very hard time in her life, and now she's dealing with the consequences. With that being said, let's get to her storyline in season 1. But here's the thing, she doesn't really have a well-defined storyline. I know it's really hard to write protagonists, but when it comes to Rue learning lessons and fitting into the environment around her, she just falls flat. She really only interacts with her family, Jules and Fez. Everyone just sees her in passing. Hell, she doesn't even talk to Nate for the first time until the last episode of the season. He's literally the antagonist of the season and she's the protagonist, and they don't interact any other time throughout the season. One thing I will give Sam Levinson credit for, though, is that she's written well as a normal teenage girl. I mean, besides the drug addict part, she feels like a solid interpretation of an average teenage girl. But that's the thing. That does her a disservice throughout the show. We have characters like Jules, Maddie, Kat, and Nate acting out and doing buck wild shit. Meanwhile, Rue does drugs occasionally and goes to NA meetings. the only storyline that we have for her is trying to stay sober for Jules. So with that being said, Rue's whole deal is struggling with her sobriety and falling in love. She has some issues and things going on with her sister and mother, but in the grand scheme of the season, she doesn't really pay her family any mind. Rue is pretty aimless before she meets Jules. She had no intention of staying sober. She literally uses straight out of rehab. She does not really care about how it is affecting her family. Rue is not that great to the people around her. She uses people to get what she wants. In the first episode, she asks Lexi for a favor. Then in episode 2, Lexi goes in the bathroom to check up on Rue to see if she is doing okay, and Rue flushes what she has. Then, being annoyed that it was just Lexi, Rue takes her frustration out on her. In the same episode, she tries to get more of her stuff from Fez. Having a one-track mind, she refuses to leave even though Fez's suppliers are going to be coming over. She makes the situation way riskier and stressful for Fez than it has to be, while also putting herself in danger. After almost getting assaulted by Fez's suppliers, she learns a lesson that the world of drugs is really scary. Who'd have thought? So she starts taking NA meetings more seriously. After this enters Ali, an older man who has been sober for X amount of years, and he becomes Rue's sponsor. Just to say, I love Ali. Like I said before, he gives her a realistic view of the world in getting sober. Episode 3 is where she also kisses Jules. Afterward, Jules doesn't kiss her back, and she looks shocked, so she apologizes and leaves immediately. In episode 4, where all of the other characters had apparent and obvious shifts in the plot, I had some issues trying to pinpoint what was Rue's plot point that progressed from that episode. In episode 4, where all of the other characters had apparent and obvious shifts in the plot, I had some issues trying to pinpoint what was Rue's plot point that progressed from that episode. The best that I could come up with was Rue stepping up to become more responsible, and this was the start of her relationship with Jules. So we see things get a little better with her family and friends. In episode 5, she apologizes to Lexi for being a total butt. At least she's patching things up. But this is when Lexi tells Jules that she is the reason why Jules is doing so well. After that, we have the Halloween party episode. Rue tries to protect her sister Gia from some asshat of a boy, then later breaks down from Jules' behavior, which I would say is mostly a product of her anxiety. She feels like a burden because Jules, who always treats her well, is brushing her off when Rue tells her to watch her drinking. Also, being sober at a party when you're an addict can be hard, so I'm sure she has this idea in her head that she's being a drag. In the next episode, while Jules is in the city, we see Rue in her manic and depressed states. While she is depressed, she is thinking about going to the bathroom, and she is building up the energy to do so for the entire episode. Which sounds so mundane, but I'm actually pretty impressed with how much they did with so little. You really get to see how much of a feat something is when you're in a state like that. Rue got to the point where her bladder almost burst and she didn't even make it to the bathroom. Her mother finds her on the ground balled up in pain. In her manic state, we see her piecing together that Nate was actually talking to Jules using a fake name, and he was the person who got Tyler locked up. I did like the whole sequence of Detective Rue happening in her head, but does she really do anything with it? No. She confronts Nate, and he gives her a very harsh tongue lashing, and honestly, some of what he said was true. Then, at the end of the season, we don't see Rue do much throughout the whole episode. We see her getting ready with Jules. She tells Rue about her hookup with Anna. They go to the dance. She has an exchange with Nate. Then she has an idea to run away with Jules to the city. She has second thoughts, most likely because I guess Rue just says things and her crippling anxiety wouldn't let her do such a thing as big as that. Also, she was probably thinking about some of the things Nate said, like how Jules is going to go much farther than her and Rue will only hold her back. Then Jules decides to stay on the train even when she is begging Rue to come with her. I will be honest, this whole scene escapes me. After watching this season and this scene at least 3 times, I do not know what the motivation was to split at the train station. My best hunch is that Jules didn't want to waste the money she spent on her train ticket. Rue is accustomed to throwing away her money, but Jules, think again. But anyways, after that, Rue relapses and it's a whole moment. So now we have to talk about the cheating situation. This was brought up in the special, but I wanted to leave it for the end. So in episode 4, we have this very emotional and cinematic coming together of Rue and Jules. I think this was the confirmation that they were now a couple for Rue. Throughout the show, we have come to an understanding that Rue is not a reliable narrator, and she lives in a world of her own creation. So she makes out with Jules that one night and stays over. So for Rue, that means they're a couple, which most people would think that. In the special, Ali even asks her if they talked about it and made it official, and she said no, that would be awkward. So there was an obvious communication issue between Rue and Jules, which is so prevalent. These two both live in their own heads. I feel like they have some fundamental differences that won't make them compatible as partners. Rue is monogamous and Jules is very clearly polyamorous. They just think their dynamic is so natural and doesn't need to be verbally explained to each other. So this relationship was kind of doomed from the start, which kind of sucks. And this is clearly Rue's first love and probably Jules's too. And while I love seeing them together and they make the cutest couple, I don't think it would be worth it in the long term. That's just one aspect in general. Rue's sobriety is another thing. Rue has no intention of staying sober, and Jules knows that deep down, and her biggest fear is losing her. This is addressed in their specials. Not all relationships when you're a kid last forever. They just don't know that yet. I do really think Euphoria is something special. It is not free of controversy, but one should always be critical of the content they watch. For me, Euphoria has made me feel a wide array of emotions. I don't think most shows these days trigger such emotional responses as it has for me. The way the show does not shy away from difficult subjects while also conveying the emotions of the scenes with stunning visuals is nothing like I've ever seen. Which is why I wanted to make such a long, thorough video. So this is the end of the video. Thank you so much to those who watched until the end. If you made it to the end, I really hope you like this video and subscribe to the channel and even leave a comment down below. Also, I know it has been over 6 months since my last video, and I know this video is a doozy. My next video will not be as long, I promise, nor will it take me so long to make. I am no longer working a full-time job, so you will be seeing my videos more often. I am very excited about the future of this channel, so stay tuned. Bye, be safe.